The House Elections Committee will come to order. Would the clerk please take attendance?
Chair Cerniglu.
Here.
Representatives Wagella.
Here.
Hope.
Here.
Colzar.
Here.
Burns.
Here.
Churches.
Present.
Markinen. Here. Smith.
Present.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Just getting a lot of cards here. Representative Wagella makes a motion to adopt the minutes from February 28, 2023. Without objections, the minutes are adopted. As our first matter of business, I have a substitute for HB 4033. And let me address that. Okay, this substitute would strike Local Audit and Finance Division on page 2, line 7. And this was requested by the Department of Treasury because this division no longer exists. Representative Hope makes a motion to adopt the substitute. Mr. Clerk, please call the vote.
On the motion to adopt the substitute, Chair Cerniglu.
Yes.
Representatives Wagella.
Yes.
Hope.
Yes.
Colzar.
Yes.
Burns.
Yes.
Churches.
Yes.
Markinen.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Madam Chair, you have 8 yeas, 0 nays, and 0 pass. The substitute is adopted.
Thank you. I just want to read into the record that we have a support card from Aaron Shore at the Michigan Department of State for HB 4033. We also have opposition from Ted Nichols representing himself. And I believe that's all we have for this particular bill. If I see something else, I will read it in as we move along. We will now hold a vote on House Bill 4033, introduced by Representative Paez. Representative Colzar makes a motion to report HB 4033 with recommendation. Mr. Clerk, please call the vote.
Chair Cerniglu.
Yes.
Representatives Wagella.
Yes.
Hope.
Yes.
Colzar.
Yes.
Burns.
Yes.
Churches.
Yes.
Markinen.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Madam Chair, you have 8 yeas, 0 nays, and 0 pass. HB 4033 supports recommendation. Substitute H1.
Thank you. I now have a substitute for House Bill 4127, which would add clerk's offices in the 40 days prior to an election to the list of protected places under this legislation. And it would also fix the language that limited the protections of early voting to 9 days. This sub clarifies that as long as early voting is open, those protections apply, as 9 days is the minimum amount of days the Constitution requires. I would like to make a motion to adopt the substitute. Mr. Clerk, please call the vote.
On the motion to adopt the substitute, Chair Cerniglu.
Yes.
Representatives Wagella.
Yes.
Hope.
Yes.
Colzar.
Yes.
Burns.
Yes.
Churches.
Yes.
Markinen.
No.
Smith.
No.
Madam Chair, you have 6 yeas, 2 nays, 0 pass. The substitute is adopted.
Thank you. We will now hold a vote on House Bill 4127, introduced by Rep. Cerniglu. But first, I will read any cards that were submitted. We have Ted Nichols representing himself, opposing 4127 and 4128. We have Sherry Ritchie with PIME, MFE, and Stand Up Michigan opposing 4127 and 4128. We also have Bruce Barland opposing these bills. We have Tom Lambert from Michigan Open Carry opposing these bills. We have Scott Jones from the NRA ILA in opposition. We have Kelsey Rogers, Senior Manager of State Advocacy for the Campaign Legal Center Action, in support. We have Matt Patton from Protect Democracy in support. We have Judy Karanjeff, League of Women Voters, in support of, it says 4126, but I believe it is 4127 that would be for. We also have Aaron Shore, Michigan Department of State, in support, and Chris Swope, Lansing City Clerk, in support. Okay, I think that's it. Representative Burns makes a motion to report HB 4127 with recommendation. Mr. Clerk, please call the vote.
On the motion to report, Chair Cerniglu?
Yes.
Representatives Wagella?
Yes.
Pope?
Yes.
Colzar?
Yes.
Burns?
Yes.
Churches?
Yes.
Markkinen?
No.
Smith?
No.
Madam Chair, you have 6 yeas, 2 nays, 0 pass. HB 4127 is report with recommendation, substitute H2.
Thank you. We will now hold a vote on House Bill 4128, introduced by Representative Young, and I've already read the cards submitted. Representative Churches will make a motion to report HB 4128 with recommendation. Mr. Clerk, please call the vote.
On the motion to report, Chair Cerniglu?
Yes.
Representatives Wagella?
Yes.
Pope?
Yes.
Colzar?
Yes.
Burns?
Yes.
Churches?
Yes.
Markkinen?
No.
Smith?
No.
Madam Chair, you have 6 yeas, 2 nays, 0 pass. HB 4128 is reported with recommendation.
Thank you. We will now hold testimony on House Bill 4156, which was introduced by Representative Reinigans, who is here to share testimony on the legislation. Welcome, Representative Reinigans. Will you please share your bill with us today?
Great, thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much for letting me join you today. Chair Cerniglu and Vice Chairs Wagella and Markkinen. Thank you for inviting me, members of the Election Committee. Thank you for holding this hearing on what I believe is one of the most monumental reforms that we will see passed in our lifetimes. I believe that every vote should be equal, every vote should matter, and the candidates with the most votes should win. That's how each of us and thousands of other elected officials across this country were elected to their offices, with one glaring exception, the President of the United States. The Oval Office is the only office you can win after losing the popular vote. We saw this happen in the year 2000, in the year 2016, and we were really close to this happening in 2004 and 2016 is repeated in my script, and that is redundant. In fact, 5 of the 46 presidents came to office without winning the most popular votes nationwide. Our current system also leads to the most voters being ignored in the general election campaign by virtue that they don't live in a battleground state. So only about 1/10 of our states ever meet battleground state status. The way that we elect our president is broken, but luckily for us, there's a way we can fix this, the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. The U.S. Constitution gives explicit power to state legislatures to decide how to award our electors. By working together with other states across the country, we can fix the Electoral College and ensure that the candidate with the most popular votes in all 50 states and Washington, D.C. ends up in the White House. This bill has been passed by 15 states and Washington, D.C., and right now we're at 195 of the 270 Electoral College votes needed to go into effect. Michigan's 15 Electoral College votes would bring this movement to 210 Electoral College votes committed under the Interstate Compact, and I sincerely hope we are the next state to pass this critical reform. In Michigan and across the country, the bill has bipartisan support. In 2018, here in Michigan, 25 Michigan senators co-sponsored this bill, and 15 were Republicans and 10 were Democrats. Regrettably, this bill has been stymied for years, and this is the time for us to pass it once and for all. This is something I'm particularly passionate about because it's just the right thing to do. When explaining the way we elect the president to kids, like my kindergartner, it's really hard to defend the continued use of a system that consistently fails to elect the popular vote winner into office, and it results in the majority of voters not even having their voice heard and their vote taken for granted. It is indefensible that critical issues such as a women's right to choose were stripped as a result of actions by a Supreme Court where 5 of the 9 justices were nominated and appointed by presidents who lost the national popular vote. If we were designing our electoral system from scratch today, we would never opt for the electoral college system. We are espousing the virtues of our democracy across the world, but we never tell other countries to use the electoral college system. We need to be doing everything we can to strengthen our democracy, and this bill is at the top of that list. You are about to hear from a number of organizations, individuals, and subject matter experts who support this bill. They're in good company, too. This bill has been endorsed by over 3,500 state legislators in all 50 states and dozens of organizations across the country. Opponents of this measure often bring up scary scenarios and the threat of unintended consequences. If we just spend 3 minutes kind of unwinding those scary scenarios, it only takes about 20 seconds to dismiss those scary scenarios. And, you know, if any of those objections resonate with you, you can feel free to ask the other experts in the room. There are no questions that haven't been asked, and really, honestly, they're all answered in this book. So if you have a copy there, you might be able to find the answer there yourself. The reality of the situation is that we know that popular elections work. This reform will not hurt small states, it will not hurt rural voters, or result in candidates just campaigning to large population centers. The reality is that voters everywhere and candidates will campaign all over the country. There are voters everywhere and candidates will campaign everywhere in the country. Our current system ignores tens of millions of voters just based on which state they happen to live in. Just like our US Senate and our gubernatorial candidates don't just campaign in Detroit or Grand Rapids or Ann Arbor, presidential candidates should also campaign across the whole entire country as well. In fact, slightly more of America's population lives in rural areas, about 20%, than lives in the 100 largest cities, which is under 20%. The remaining 60% of our population across our country lives in the suburbs, which is really evenly divided between Democrats and Republicans. I look forward to a day when the vote has an equal chance of determining the outcome of the presidential election, no matter whether it's cast in Detroit or Freedom Township, which is in my district, or downtown Manhattan, or even Monowi, Nebraska, which has a population of 1, and that person's vote should count too. Thank you again for hearing this bill. I strongly urge you to pass the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact bill here so that we can deliver on the principle of 1 person, 1 vote in our presidential elections. And since as state legislators, we are the ones with this constitutional right to decide how our state awards our electors. The eyes of the country are on Michigan right now, and we have the ability to do a lot of things that we haven't been able to do before. And we need to let the country know and the rest of Michigan know that we stand up for democracy. Thank you. Next, you'll be hearing from my colleague at the League of Women Voters. And I want to make sure that we know that we need to get rid of this focus on battleground states only. Let's make sure every vote is heard in every election. And let's make 2023 the year to get this done.
Thank you, Representative Reinigans. Would you mind staying for questions?
I would not, but do you want to hear from everybody before we do questions?
We were going to do the questions for the people after they spoke. Because we have a lot of people that are going to testify today, and I'm not sure if we're going to get to all of them. And as the bill sponsor,
sure, I'm happy to answer questions. And if there's somebody who actually could answer it better, I might refer.
Sure, not a problem. Does anyone on the committee have a question for Representative Reinigans? Representative Colzar.
Thank you for bringing this bill forward. This bill has been introduced multiple times. Has it only been by Democratic sponsors, or have there been Republican sponsors as well in the past?
The majority of times this has been brought to the state legislature has been brought by Republicans. I think only once yourself in the last term, Rep. Colzar has brought this bill, but in previous terms, multiple Republicans have been the ones bringing this bill. Is there an expert in the room who knows the exact number?
Well, the reason I ask is just to point out, so if I said that that this issue is nonpartisan, would that lend some credence to that?
I think so.
Thank you.
Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You stated that this will broaden campaigns to all people, but what evidence is there of that result?
Well, since this hasn't been done, we would like to make sure that all of the candidates running for president are earning every single one of their votes. We've unfortunately seen some votes, some voters think that their vote doesn't count because they haven't been campaigned to, but I don't think that is a very strong argument against electing people by one person, one vote, the way I was elected, the way you were elected. And I don't know if there's any other folks in the room who want to add more detail to this answer.
We can also ask that question again.
Sure.
Thank you.
To the others.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, thank you, Representative Reingens. And Judy Karanjov from the League of Women Voters. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. I am Judy Karanjov, Chair of the League of Women Voters of Michigan's Advocacy Committee. For more than 100 years, the League of Women Voters has worked to ensure every person has the desire, right, knowledge, and confidence to participate in our democracy. We are proud to be a nonpartisan organization that works on vital issues of concern to our democracy. The League of Women Voters of Michigan believes that the direct popular vote method for electing the president and vice president is essential to representative government, and that the principle of one person, one vote should govern our presidential elections. Simply put, every vote should count, every vote should matter equally, and the candidate who gets the most popular votes should win the election. This is the case for all elections in this country, except one, the presidential election. For over a decade, the National League of Women Voters has supported the National Popular Vote Compact, and we are thrilled at the possibility of passing this reform here in Michigan this year. Voters in the last election sent a clear message that rejected efforts to undermine our elections and politicians who want to weaken our democracy. Because of the winner-take-all method of awarding electoral votes used by 48 states, including Michigan, presidential candidates only pay attention to the concerns of voters in the closely divided states. In recent elections, virtually all of the general election campaign events were concentrated in about a dozen battleground states. The politically irrelevant spectator states, home to between 70 and 80% of the country's rural states, western states, southern states, and northeastern states. Governance, not just campaigning, is distorted by the concentration of attention on just a few states. Looking ahead at the 2024 election, it is predicted that just 9 states will be competitive in the presidential election. These states can expect to receive 100% of the attention, while the other 80% of voters are completely ignored. Overall, there are 4 sources of inequality in the value of a vote for the president under the current system. 1, because of the 2 senatorial electoral votes that each state receives, in addition to the number warranted by population. There is a 3-to-1 inequality in the value of a vote in Wyoming compared to a value of a vote in Michigan. 2, there are additional substantial inequalities because of the imprecision of the process used to apportion U.S. House seats and hence electoral votes among the states. 3, because of intra-decade population changes are not reflected in the Electoral College until the next census. And 4, because of voter turnout differences from state to state, which devalue voters in high turnout states such as Michigan. For the League of Women Voters of Michigan, this situation is untenable and has gone on far too long. The solution to this problem is before you, the National Popular Vote Compact, which has already been passed as stated by 15 states and District of Columbia, representing 195 of the necessary 270 electoral votes. With a national popular vote, candidates will be incentivized to campaign everywhere and will take on the nation's interest into account when governing. Every vote will be equal, and every voter will be relevant in every presidential election. The League of Women Voters strongly supports the National Popular Vote Bill and want to be a part of transforming presidential elections for the better. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Karanjef. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, we now welcome Courtney Sims from Mothering Justice. Is Courtney in the overflow room, perhaps? There she is. Hello, welcome, Courtney. Ms. Sims, yes.
Hello. Thank you to the Elections Committee for the opportunity to be testifying in favor of this bill. My name is Courtney Blake Sims, and I am representing Mothering Justice, and we urge you to please vote in favor of this bill to help make sure that our mamas' voices and the voices of all of our voters count in every presidential election. Mothering Justice is dedicated to advancing our mamas' agenda, which is centered on reproductive justice, affordable child care, basic needs security, and paid time off to care for our loved ones. We elevate the voices of the next generation of mothers and stand up for mothers of color, whose voices have historically been overlooked. Success on all of these issues depends on a functioning democracy and transparency in our elections. Currently, 70 to 80% of voters have their votes taken for granted every 4 years because it is a foregone conclusion of how their state's electoral votes will be awarded. When the national popular vote goes into effect, all of our votes will be equal in the presidential election. This will newly enfranchise tens of millions of voters on a scale that we have not seen since the passage of the Voting Rights in 1965. We are proud to be a part of a coalition calling for this historical change. We are also excited about what we can expect by electing the president by popular vote will do for our voter engagement and participation. Many of our voters have come to understand that they are politically irrelevant in the process of electing the president. Compared to the rest of the country, voter turnout in the battleground states was 11% higher in 2020 and 2016, 16% higher in 2012, and 9% higher in 2008. We're particularly hopeful that we'll see an increase in voter engagement amongst our youngest voters. More than half of Generation Z is now old enough to vote, and they are uniquely affected by this inequitable system. When they cast their ballot in 2024, they'll have spent more than a third of their lives with the president being the popular vote loser. For millennials like myself, it's no better. The oldest millennials cast their first ballots in the presidential race in 2000, and we saw George W. Bush win the presidency despite losing the popular vote by more than 540,000 votes. The youngest millennials cast their first ballots in a presidential race in 2016 and saw Donald Trump win the presidency despite Hillary Clinton winning the popular vote by 2.8 million votes. These two generations of Americans have been reminded repeatedly throughout their lives that their votes for presidents don't matter as much as what state they cast their ballot in. I hope we can fix this for all of their sake. They are certainly the ones who are dealing with the consequences of this broken system for the longest. Consider this: 5 out of 9 Supreme Court justices were appointed by popular vote losers, resulting in decisions widely out of step with the options of our nation. Reproductive justice is of the utmost importance to our mothers, and their access to health care was deeply restricted and will continue to be infringed upon by the decisions of this court. It is on all of us to leave the country better for the next generation. And at Mothering Justice, it is clear that electing the president by popular vote is a part of doing that. We strongly urge you to support the National Vote Bill. It is what's best for Michigan, what's best for America and best for our future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sims. Do we have any questions for Ms. Sims? Seeing none, we thank you. We now call Quentin Turner from Common Cause, Michigan. Welcome, Mr. Turner.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Sarnaglu and committee members for inviting me here today, allowing me to speak. My name is Quentin Turner. I'm the program director for Common Cause Michigan. Common Cause works to create open, honest, and accountable government that serves the public interest. We promote equal rights, opportunity, and representation for all. And we empower people to make their voices heard in the political process. We believe that all Americans are entitled to have a fair and equal opportunity to participate in democracy, and that elections should represent the will of the people. We ask you to support the National Popular Vote Bill in order to finally repair the Electoral College. Among the many issues discussed today, the current method of electing the president regularly enables a few thousand votes in a small number of states to decide the presidency, thereby fueling post-election controversies and threatening the country's stability. The fact that a few thousand votes in a handful of closely divided states regularly decide this presidency is a recurring feature of the current system. The state-by-state aspect of this system starts by dividing the nation's 158 million voters into 51 separate jurisdictions. Then virtually all campaigning is channeled into a few closely divided battleground states, because they are the only places where candidates have anything to gain or lose. Inevitably, some of these battleground states end up being close on election day. These close results, in turn, generate post-election doubt, controversy, litigation, and unrest over real or imagined results. The danger posed by these post-election controversies in extremely close states is heightened because the country is currently in an era of close elections. In fact, between 1992 and 2020, the average national popular vote margin was 4.3%. Electing the president by national popular vote restores confidence, accountability, security, and stability to our political system. With the assurance that every vote counts equally, voters throughout the country will have more incentive to take part in democracy, vote for our country's president, and trust the election results. We stand alongside many coalition partners here today, as well as other groups supportive of the national popular vote in Michigan. These include the NAACP Michigan State Conference, the Michigan Democratic Party, Statewide Indivisible Michigan, Jewish Democracy Council of America, Democrats Abroad, Public Citizen, People for the American Way, Stand Up America, and more. We are all eager to see Michigan join the National Popular Vote Compact and know that now is the time. We cannot let another session go by without action on this reform. We're calling on you to help Michigan do our part in saving democracy. Thank you so much, and once again, have a good morning.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Representative Smith.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here. This one is pertaining to if you believe this is nonpartisan with a national popular vote. My question is for all the states that assume it, are they all Democrat states, Democrat ran or led?
Thank you so much for that question, Representative Smith. It's a really good question. I don't know the answer, whether or not all the states who've adopted it are led by which parties, but I can find out the answer and send that to your office.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it.
Are there any other questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next, we have the ACLU. Is Gabrielle Dressner available? I see we have Marissa Kovach.
Gabby isn't here. I'm going to take her place.
Great. Welcome, Ms. Kovach.
Good morning. My name is Marissa Kovach. I am the Legislative Director at the ACLU of Michigan. I really want to thank you for bringing up this important legislation this morning. I've submitted my testimony in writing, so I'll keep my comments brief. We're supportive of House Bill 4156 and endorse the National Popular Vote Compact. The ACLU supports a fundamental principle of one person, one vote, and the National Vote Compact is the best path forward to achieve this in presidential elections. The National Popular Vote will give citizens equal power in elections, regardless of the state in which that voter lives. So instead of voters in a few swing states deciding the outcomes of elections, candidates will need to speak and listen to all voters across the country equally. There are many ways in which the method we currently use to elect the president is flawed. Chief among these is that the winner of the popular vote, or the person who loses the popular vote can, and with more frequency, win the entire election these days. And the current system could easily result in the U.S. House of Representatives choosing the president on a one state, one vote basis. In the U.S. Constitution, if no candidate receives an absolute majority of electoral votes, the U.S. House of Representatives chooses the president, and the District of Columbia also has no voice in that process. And this scenario is more politically plausible when we look at the top states at play these days. So there are also some injustices related to the second place candidate ending up in the White House. To highlight one that is particularly of importance to the ACLU, there are sitting Supreme Court justices who have been appointed by popular vote losers. This means there are members of the U.S. Supreme Court who are serving lifetime appointments who are placed on the bench by a candidate that more Americans voted against rather than voting for. So then, in closing out, I would just say, finally, the U.S. Constitution does give each state legislature the exclusive power to decide how its electoral votes are awarded. The Supreme Court has held that states have exclusive power over the appointment and mode of appointment of electors under the Constitution. So you exercising this state power does in no way infringe on any area of supremacy with the United States, because there is no federal power to award electoral votes. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next, we have former House Speaker Chuck Perricone representing National Popular Vote. Welcome, Speaker Perricone.
Good morning. To say it's been a minute would be an understatement for me. Good morning, Madam Chair, Vice Chairs, members. It's a pleasure to be here and my honor and privilege to have this opportunity. I've got a couple of points I want to make very briefly. Tell you right up front, I'm not an expert on the issue, but I've been looking at this for a number of years. I don't have all of the details and the numerics and the charts memorized, but I've seen more than enough to convince me over time that this is something that I wish we had done. It wasn't raised at that point in time when I had the privilege of serving as Speaker of the House, or I would have been all over it, I can assure you. A couple of observations, as I said. First of all, everyone here, including myself, we occupied the seats that we had the privilege of serving by winning the most votes. Everyone else that we know that serves at every level won the most votes, except for the one office, and that's the person that serves nationally, who doesn't win with the most votes. And it's because of the Electoral College. I don't know a Democrat or a Republican that would change the Constitution to block the opportunity to have something like the Electoral College. I wouldn't. I would argue to those who claim the congressional model or any other variant that actually takes away your authority from a state perspective, and I would hope you wouldn't do that, because you have the freedom to move this bill or a variation thereof in the future if someone comes up with a better idea, let's say, and you should retain that power, that authority, because you're closer to the people. And we're rising above the other point I'd like to raise, and that is everything these days is so red hot politically. I never imagined anything like this. And I came through the 80s with the Christian Coalition and all of the other groups. And at that time, everyone talked about how, wow, this is something. What we're going through right now, what you're going through right now, and you do have my sympathies. It makes me sick to think about what you go through every day. I don't care what party you're in, is ridiculous. This issue, don't let anyone politicize this issue. This is the most sacred component of democracy there is. It's one person, one vote. Shame on anyone that tries to turn that into politics. And the fundamental reason for that is it's a shell game. The politics change with the tides. 10, 20 years from now, it's going to look different. It always does. Everything just repeats. The rarest thing in any state capital is a new idea, right? If you don't know that yet, you'll figure that out over the next few years, I guarantee it. I did. I learned the hard way. The other thing I'd like to point out is we have history. Women's suffrage, the Voting Rights Act with African Americans. They didn't fight for the Electoral College. They were out there for one person, one vote. You know that. So do I. Let's be honest. We've got to take a look at that for that reason. And I want to bring one other angle to this debate, which just occurred to me a few days ago. I have kids. I have grandkids. When I was Speaker, I was 36. I had 3 young children. They spent a lot of time on the House floor. You all have family as well. We're not just changing politically and in terms of how we view the politics in this country. Unfortunately, foreign interference with our elections, it's already old school. We don't even really think about it anymore. It just kind of is, like the sun rising every morning. Don't allow that to happen with technology and what's coming up now. If you watch 60 Minutes, just this past Sunday evening, hardly a place for traditional conservative thought. I think we can all agree. What was one of their lead stories? Artificial intelligence, the bots, ChatGPT. How are we going to sort false from real? That's what worries me. I'm thinking about my kids and grandkids because some of these things I may not live long enough to see. But I'm not stupid. I wasn't born yesterday. There are things taking place now that we are not going to control, neither are you. There's only one thing we've ever been able to fall back on and rely upon to save a democracy. Only one. One person, one vote. Don't let anybody take that away. That needs to be written in stone. That would be a very tough thing to wrest away from the American public. Those are my comments. I can't thank you enough for taking the time to listen to me. It's been my pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Speaker Perricone. Do we have any questions? Representative Smith?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for testifying today. And my question is there anything that would prohibit California from allowing a 6-year-old to vote? This has no impact under current law in Michigan's 15 electoral votes, but under the national popular vote, it could impact our electoral vote, correct?
I don't know the answer to that from a legal standpoint. We have 2 people that do, but what I will point out to you about California is in 2012, there were 12 states that received 100%. 12 states received all 100% of the general election campaign events. California was not one of them. In 2020, there were 12 states that received 96% of the general election campaign events. California was not one of them. So whether or not that 6-year-old can vote, they're not going to be attending a presidential campaign event. And they should be, whether they can or not. And today, with the Electoral College, that doesn't happen. That's the problem. Most states are flyover states. That's not what anybody envisioned. We're supposed to be coming together to elect our national leader. That doesn't happen today. There's no excuse for that. I'll take any risk I need to take on candidates. I know you would too. But we've got to restore integrity and honesty to this process, and most of the people in this country don't have the ability to see a campaign event. It's ridiculous. I saw another hand. I'm sorry, Madam
No.
Chair, but you were looking that way, and I thought I
Yep,
saw one
yep,
over here.
Representative Churches.
Thank you, former Speaker Perricone. I appreciate your time today. I have two quick questions. How long did you serve as Speaker of the House, and what party did you represent?
I was Speaker for 2 years. I was the first Speaker under term limits. We opened this building, and I put laptops on the desk. So it was a total of 6 years before I was term limited out, and I was a Republican Speaker, member of the Republican Party.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Speaker Perricone.
Thank you so much.
Next, we have former Senate Majority Leader Randy Richardville, representing conservatives for National Popular Vote. Welcome, Mr. Richardville.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. I actually served under Chuck Perricone as a freshman and kind of cut my teeth in this building a long time ago. I was one of the first occupants in 1999. And I think during the era of term limits, I've held the most leadership positions on the Republican side of the aisle as anyone that has served during that 30 plus years or so. And I'm here to explain to you a little bit some things that were explained to me when I was a freshman. There was a gentleman named John Engler who was governor of the state of Michigan at that time, and he used to tell us that good policy made for good politics. In other words, if you do the right thing when you're in these chambers, when you go back home and tell people what you did, it'll help you to be reelected or reelectable anyways. But thank you very much for the opportunity for me to be here and to talk to you for a few moments about this. Representative Hildebrands, who later became Senator Hildebrand, I don't know if you know Dave or not, Dave introduced this bill when I was the leader of the Michigan Senate. And they brought that big book that I never did read in to show me it, and I thought that was great, and I patted Dave on the head and told him he might have a chance in leadership in the next term, and he could do that, but he wasn't going to do it under my watch. I was more than skeptical about the idea of the national popular vote. However, in the years subsequent to that, I have studied and delved a little bit deeper into the issue, and I could go on for a long period of time about why this is the best nonpartisan bill that I think we could entertain. But I'm going to talk a little bit from the conservative side because, like I said, this was mostly initiated. It was mostly initiated by Republicans in the time that I served in the legislature from 1999 until I think 2014 is when I left, 2015, something like that. Chuck Perricone, there's other speakers of the House. There are former lieutenant governors, former Republican members of Congress, two former Republican Party chairs, and a number of former representatives and senators that have endorsed this compact, and I'm just one of them. But what I'm here to tell you about a little bit is debunking some of the myths that are associated with this idea. First of all, there's the discussion about California and New York controlling an election for president under the national popular vote. In a presidential election under the compact, every voter in every state would be equal. A vote cast in a big city would not become more or less valuable than a vote anywhere else. As Los Angeles does not control statewide elections in California, it's hardly in a position to control a nationwide election for president. I would point out that when Republicans competed in California, California elected Republicans Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan. It's a simple fact that 82% of Americans don't live in New York or California. I would also note that the population of the country's 5 biggest cities, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, and Philadelphia, represent a total of about 6% of the entire population of the United States. So unless you reject basic math, it's impossible for 6% of the population to outvote 94% or for 18% to outvote 82%. The present method used in Michigan is not in the United States Constitution. It's not even in the Federalist Papers. It is not the method of the Founding Fathers. The Electoral College that we have today, with 48 states using what's called the state winner-take-all method, was not designed, anticipated, or favored by the Founding Fathers. Rather, it's the result of decades of change driven by the emergence of political parties, which the Founding Fathers didn't also expect, and the desire of each state's majority party not to give any of their electoral votes to the minority party. In my campaigns for state representatives, state senator, and county commissioner, I always campaigned to win the most votes. That is, after all, how all of us here were elected. The one office in the entire United States that doesn't require the winning candidate to win the most votes is the President of the United States. The one office that's supposed to represent the whole country. The candidate who receives the most votes wins. This is a quintessential principle that every Michiganian and every American, regardless of party or ideology, believes. For all these reasons, Madam Chair and members of the committee, I support the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact and encourage my friends on both sides of the aisle to vote in support of this legislation.
Thank you, Leader Richardville. Do we have any questions? Yes, Representative Markkinen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've listened to quite a bit of testimony already this morning. Thank you for your service to the state.
Yeah.
Why in God's name did the Founding Fathers put the Electoral College in there anyway?
Well, that's a good question.
In your
the makeup
opinion.
of the country was considerably different at that point. Virginia was the state, I believe, that had the most population. If I'm not mistaken, the entirety of the country had something like 5 million of people in total. So I don't know specifically why they did that, but there, of course, going back, there were only 13 states at that time, and so it was a considerably different idea that they were looking at versus what we have today. That's probably the best that I can tell you as an answer to that question.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Leader Richardville. Next, we will welcome Professor Gary Wolfram from Hillsdale College, representing himself. Welcome.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, thank you for having me. I'm the William Simon Professor of Economics and Public Policy at Hillsdale College, and I've worked in the legislature on the policy staff of the Senate Republican Caucus. I hate to say how old I am, but from 1983 to 1989. Some of you might not have been born when that happened. And I was Deputy State Treasurer under John Engler, and I worked as Chief of Staff to a Republican member of Congress, Nick Smith. And as my credentials suggest, I approach the National Popular Vote, a compact from a conservative perspective, and the legislation today is truly about policy. The National Popular Vote Interstate Compact is nonpartisan electoral reform supported, as you've heard, on a broad bipartisan basis. Actually, the legislation before this committee preserves and strengthens the Electoral College. It does not amend, abolish, alter, or otherwise abrogate the constitutional framework of electing a president of the United States. It's a compact among the states meant to overcome the shortcomings of the winner-take-all method of electing the electors. And all the states other than Maine and Nebraska have winner-take-all. Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution says that each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature may therefore direct a number of electors. State legislators, you folks, are vested with the sole and exclusive authority under the U.S. Constitution to decide how the electors are chosen, and the compact does just that. It's merely an agreement among compacting states to assign their electors to the winner of the national popular vote. Changing the method of awarding the electors is just that. It's changing the method. It does not alter or amend the Electoral College. I want to emphasize the present method used by Michigan, state winner-take-all method, doesn't appear anywhere, as is pointed out in the United States Constitution, and was not the method used by the Founding Fathers, or that the method they thought would be used. Let me just address one important aspect, constitutional aspect of the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact that hasn't been addressed. Some people have incorrectly suggested that congressional consent is needed for the national popular vote to take place, and this is not the case. The United States Supreme Court ruled in U.S. Steel versus Multi-State Tax Commission and other cases that congressional consent is only necessary when interstate compacts, and this is a quote, encroach upon or interfere with the just supremacy of the United States. Because the High Court held in McPherson versus Blacker, which actually the precedent came out of Michigan, that states have the exclusive and plenary power to choose the method of appointing their presidential electors, the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact does not encroach or interfere with federal supremacy. Thus, under well-established judicial jurisprudence, congressional consent would not be necessary for the compact to take effect. Finally, I teach a class at Hillsdale College in what academics call a public choice, and I'm currently writing a textbook on that if you want to get a copy. And basically what it does is use the methodology of economics to examine the political process. And basically, it just recognizes that people respond to incentives. When you go to the grocery store and go to buy food, you respond to what the price is, or you might respond to what someone says they'll, give you something if you'll bring them back this food. And so if you prefer to get elected, you're going to act in a fashion that's going to increase your incentive of being elected. Now, as noted many times, any candidate running for president under the current method, which is state winner take all, will not spend time or money in any state where there's little chance that the race won't be close. In states such as Michigan, the winner take all, which is the method used here, and suppose that polls show that you're only going to get 44% of the vote. Well, you're going to get the same amount of electors if you never show up than if you spend millions of dollars to try to influence the outcome. So if you know that you're not probably going to win overall, then you're not going to spend time there. And as a consequence, what everyone has been talking about so far, presidential campaigns are not national campaigns. Clearly, we elect a president of the battleground states of America, and Michigan has been a battleground state in the past, but it is also times when it's not a battleground state. It's interesting that, and if you look at the winter 2020 issue of Harvard Law and Policy Review, Lawrence Lessig, who's the professor of law and leadership at Harvard Law School, pointed out that presidential campaigns focus almost exclusively on battleground states, and he points out in 2016 campaign, 99% of all general campaign spending occurred in just 14 states. To solve this problem, as well as also the one person, one vote that's been brought up briefly, Professor Lessig called for ratification of the national popular vote as soon as possible. Michigan should be a battleground state in each and every presidential elections. And if you were to pass this legislation, your constituents will be equal to the votes of every other American. And with that, I would like to thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the committee for allowing me to talk.
Thank you, Professor Wolfram. Do we have any questions? Thank you. No questions.
Like my students.
I'm just going to take a moment to read some of these cards into the record. We have opposing the bill, we have Ted Nichols representing himself. We also have Rob Anderson from Farm Bureau opposing the bill. We have support for the bill from Aaron Shore, Michigan Department of State. We have support from Nancy Wang, Voters Not Politicians. We have David Gunther, Mackinac Center for Public Policy, opposing the bill. We have Jasper Hendricks III from Democrats for the Electoral College, opposing the bill. We have Stephanie Cruz from Heritage Action for America, opposing the bill. We have Bill Richardson opposing the bill. And now we're just going to switch it up a little bit and have Sean Parnell from Save Our States in opposition. Welcome, Mr. Parnell.
Thank you. Chair Suniglu, members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to testify today. You should all have written testimony from me that was distributed to you. I'm just going to summarize that rather than go through all of it. You should also have a red folder that is going to provide backup material for the things I'm going to tell you. Because as you might imagine, after you hear what I say, the folks from National Popular Vote don't necessarily agree with what I'm going to say, so I thought it useful to provide documentation. Although they do actually agree on a couple of points, and that's kind of interesting. So what my testimony focuses on is the main defect of this compact, which is that there is no official national vote total that can be used for the purpose of national popular vote. There's no federal agency, commission, or officer that produces certified vote totals that will then be used. And the compact does not create such an agency, commission, or official. Instead, the chief election officer of member states, that's usually going to be the Secretary of State, is responsible independently for going out and obtaining vote totals from all of the other states, both those that are in the compact and those that are not in the compact. The only guidance that the compact provides is that those vote totals should come from an official statement produced by another state if such a statement is available. And suffice it to say, there are a lot of problems with this approach to attempt to cobble together a national vote total and award presidential electors based on it. These problems might not matter much if you have a national vote margin of 10 million votes, 5 million votes. But if you have a close national margin, and by my count, 4 of the last 16 have been close, you are going to have a serious problem on your hands, potentially, because of the things I'm about to outline, where it simply will not be possible to conclusively determine which candidate has received the most votes, because every state runs its own election and will continue to do so under the compact. They run their own election according to their own codes, standards, policies, practices, and procedures, and those don't always line up well with what the compact requires. So a couple of things that I want to highlight, problems I want to highlight. So New York cannot accurately count its votes to save its life, or at least for the last 4 election cycles. They have repeatedly left tens or hundreds of thousands of votes off of their certificate of ascertainment. This is one of those official statements that National Popular Vote points to when they say that is where you get your official vote totals. 425,000 votes were left off of their 2012 certificate of ascertainment. Maybe not a big deal, again, if you have that 5 million vote national margin. You have a closer election, 425,000 missing votes, that's going to be a big problem. Ranked choice voting creates a serious problem as well. The compact assumes that every state is going to produce a single vote total for each candidate. Under ranked choice voting, of course, there are at least 2 vote totals. There's the initial first place vote totals, and then there is the final vote totals after the ranked choice process has been undertaken. These vote totals can differ by tens or even hundreds of thousands of votes, and the compact does not provide any guidance on which vote total is to be chosen. It will be basically at the discretion of that chief election official. And one of the things that you will find in that red folder are official statements from Alaska and Maine, the 2 states that currently use ranked choice voting, and those official statements contain, again, both those first place votes and the final votes. So that choice is going to be something that the chief election official has to make. Ranked choice voting creates another problem for the compact, which is what happens when a third-party candidate finishes ahead of either the Democrat or the Republican, as has happened many times in our nation's history. what happens is that final vote total, and here I will note, the National Popular Vote people insist that it will in fact have to be the final vote total on those documents that have to be used in tabulating the national vote. But what happens in that case is that third place Democrat or Republican will have 0 votes reported out of that state to be tabulated in the national vote total. That is going to be very controversial. If you think that the, frankly, nonsense of 2020 was bad, wait until America literally watches hundreds of thousands or millions of votes on, you know, the CNN account go away and turn into 0 votes once that ranked choice voting process happens. That's going to be a very serious problem. You also have the issue of what happens if there is in fact not an official statement available from states on the timeline that the compact requires. As 2 National Popular Vote lobbyists explained in great detail in a North Dakota hearing 2 years ago, in that case, the chief election official of member states is supposed to estimate the vote totals for that state. And the methodology that they are to use is whatever makes sense to them. And the methodologies that were described by those 2 lobbyists that could be used would have been off by tens or hundreds of thousands of votes, either inflating or reducing the total number of votes for the candidates, depending on which methodology was chosen. There's also the fact that states can just kind of do some strange things sometimes that don't really mesh well with the compact. California in 2016, basically because of a bad ballot design issue, wound up on its certificate of ascertainment, and again, this certificate of ascertainment from California is in that red book. They wound up doubling Donald Trump's vote total. It didn't matter in 2016. Basically, there were 2 different electoral slates pledged to Donald Trump in California, the Republican Party, of course, as well as the American Independent Party. Under the process that National Popular Vote insists will be followed for tabulating the National Popular Vote total, because there are an extra 4.5 million votes on the American Independent Party line in that California Certificate of Ascertainment, those votes have to be included in that tabulation. That actually, ironically enough, would have given Donald Trump the win in 2016 if National Popular Vote were in effect, because Hillary Clinton, I think we all understand, legitimately received more votes by about 2.9 million. Under the broken process that National Popular Vote uses to try to cobble together these vote totals, Donald Trump actually technically had more votes in 2016. That seems pretty outrageous to me. I suspect maybe to some of you as well. Finally, the compact, or the rhetoric of the compact, promises that they will count every vote from every state. However, there's kind of an asterisk on that. If you read that book, and I've read quite a bit of it, I won't say I've read all 1,100, I maybe read about 800 of the 1,100 pages. But if you read it very closely, what you'll see is that they really are only going to count votes from states that run their elections according to the way National Popular Vote requires them to. So 2 very simple examples, one historical, one more current. A couple of years ago, there was a bill in Arizona proposing that rather than use the winner-take-all system, that the state instead award 1 elector for every congressional district, as Maine and Nebraska do, but then the 2 additional electoral votes would be chosen by the legislature. I don't really have an opinion one way or the other on whether this is a good idea or not, but it's an interesting idea that's out there. If Arizona were to do that, National Popular Vote would look at that and say, there is no statewide popular election for electors. So no votes from Arizona. That seems like it's going to be a problem if any state ever adopts a electoral vote allocation system that doesn't mesh with what the compact requires. Historically speaking, an even better example might be the 1960 election. Historians actually still debate who received the most popular votes, Kennedy or Nixon, and it mostly has to do with a question over Alabama. They did one of those strange things with their election that year, and nobody's really sure how to allocate the votes. Either Kennedy won by 112,000 or 113 or 118 or 119,000. The estimates are kind of all over the map on that one. Or Nixon won by about 60,000 or 65,000. Again, all depending on how one looks at Alabama. So national popular vote actually does have a solution to what happens when states do some of the things that Alabama did. And that is to, of course, disregard all votes from those states. In 1960, using the criteria that national popular vote establishes for whether a state has run a statewide popular election, they would discard about 11 million votes from 7 states, including New York, then the most populous state, and award or name Richard Nixon the popular vote winner by about 600,000 votes. That information, again, in the red folder. So these are just a handful of the problems that can and I think will arise, particularly if you have a close election, if the national popular vote is in effect and the secretaries of state of 20, 21, 22 states are all independently trying to figure out who received the most votes. I'm almost done, I promise. I do want to address just a few things that have been said here. The book, that very long book, I really want to encourage you to read the last, what I think I remember are the last 2 myths in that book. The second to the last myth is, it is a myth that there will be unintended consequences. The last myth is, it is a myth that the compact is not perfect. I think we've all been around long enough to have seen that there's no such thing as perfect legislation. A good chunk of the work that you do in this committee and in most other committees as well is looking at laws that were passed, years ago and saying, this didn't quite get this thing right. We need to go back and tweak it. Because this is an interstate compact, you do not really have that option. You have to accept this compact as it is. There's no tweaking, there's no modifications, there's no, we can fix this. This is the compact, and this is what you would be stuck with, and these problems are what you would be stuck with. A lot has been said today about problems with winner-take-all. I'm actually kind of sympathetic to the argument that winner-take-all is not necessarily the best approach to awarding presidential electors. What I would encourage you to think about is that rather than trying to address that problem through a compact that, let's face it, may never go into effect. It certainly is not going to be in effect for the 2024 election. It almost certainly is not going to be in effect by 2028. In my, sort of nightmare scenarios, maybe 2032. If you want to deal with winner-take-all, deal with winner-take-all. You can do that this year. You can pass a law that in 2024 will allocate Michigan's electors in a different manner that addresses the shortcomings of winner-take-all. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up there now, and I'm happy to answer any questions regarding anything I've said, any of the other witnesses have said, or just general questions that anybody might have.
Thank you, Mr. Parnell. Do we have any questions? Representative Wagella?
Yeah, so I really trying to understand your position here. So is the crux of your argument that states are not responsible in obtaining accurate vote totals? Because that came up repeatedly.
So the crux of my position is it is going to be very difficult to always to obtain accurate, definitive, conclusive vote totals. Again, think of that ranked choice voting issue where your Secretary of State goes to the Alaska Secretary of State's office, actually technically it's their lieutenant governor, and they're trying to obtain the vote totals to plug into this compact. If you look in that red folder, there are official statements from Alaska that give the vote totals for, I think it's the U.S. Senate race in 2022. And there are both the final and the initial vote totals on that official statement. And your Secretary of State has to decide which one do I use. And I can tell you that there are good arguments for both. The argument for using the initial vote totals is, well, that's the most comparable to what other states have done. And, the argument for ranked choice voting is, well, this is how Alaska decides to award its electoral votes, so maybe I should use that. There's no definitive answer, and it's that ambiguity and uncertainty that is the issue.
So take out ranked choice voting just for a second, because I think that's its own separate thing. The current system with the Electoral College, we decide who we award those Electoral College votes to based on the results that states have.
Yes.
So, and we trust those results. So what I am not understanding is how could we not trust the results that states have when that's
Sure.
the crux of all of our elections in this country.
So the issue is that the votes cast in Alaska make sense for awarding Alaska's electoral votes, but you can't necessarily easily add them across state lines. They're cast and reported in different ways on different timelines, and it's not, as my friends on the other side will say, it's not a matter of simply doing the math. If you've ever been involved in a election contest, recount, challenge, what you will have seen is that it's not about adding, how do we add votes once we have the votes? It's about deciding, do we accept the vote totals from this jurisdiction, from these precincts? Do we include or do we exclude these absentee ballots that maybe didn't meet some technical qualification? Those are the issues that can be resolved within states, but have a real difficulty trying to be resolved. So in New York in 2012, when it left 425,000 votes off of its certificate of ascertainment, Barack Obama was ahead by 1.7 million votes. So those missing 425,000 votes were not going to have any impact on how New York awarded its electors. Under national popular vote, when your Secretary of State and when the other chief election officials are gathering vote totals, again, 425,000 missing votes, if you have a close national election, along with some of potentially these other issues, that's going to be a problem. When states do these kind of different or unique or strange things, it doesn't necessarily affect what goes on in that state because they're fully capable of dealing with it. It's when you have this, trying to aggregate votes across state lines. It's kind of like trying to add fractions where the denominator isn't the same. You have to convert, you have to do stuff, but there's no obvious, easy way to do those conversions. There's no obvious, easy way to figure out what the official vote count is.
Thank you, Mr. Parnell. Will you be available after committee if there's further questions?
I would be very happy to talk
Wonderful.
with anybody.
Thank you. So we are running out of time here, and I sincerely apologize to those who we have not heard. We are going to take, so we're going to have two, maybe three more speakers. So we have John Crawford from Keep Our 50 States. I'm going to ask you to limit your testimony to no more than 2 minutes. I know you hoped for more, but if you would like to come up and very quickly tell us your position, I am open to hearing that. That would be in opposition. Is John Crawford available? Okay, so we're going to move on to, I've got Stephen Lydell from National Popular Vote from Dykema, and also Christopher Pearson from National Popular Vote. If you two gentlemen would be willing to come up together, we can hear your testimony briefly, and then we will have to adjourn because that's all the time we have for this room. Welcome. Oh, this is Mr. Crawford. Okay. Mr. Crawford, you have about 2 minutes. I apologize, but if you can get it all out there, they're going to want this room back.
Great.
So,
Hey, thanks very much. Appreciate the opportunity. 2 minutes is, we'll see if we can get her done, the Cliff Notes version. Basically, I'm just a guy, retired, live up in Newaygo County, Michigan. I've taken this issue on kind of as an avocation over the last 10 or 12 years. And what a lot of us seem to be missing is the fact that the United States is a federation. First and foremost, it's a federation of states. The states are entities. The states are living beings. They're not natural beings, but they're entities. They can enter into contracts. That's what this is. It's a collusion agreement. It's literally a collusion agreement. And you're allowed to do that. Just because you're allowed to do something doesn't mean you should do something. We're here, I'm speaking to you as our legislature, okay? Our state acts, our state thinks, our state feels through you, the legislature. And stop thinking like Democrats, stop thinking like Republicans. Start thinking like Michiganders. Start thinking like Michigan is one of 50 states. Our states collectively are the boss of the federal government. The federal government is not a party to the Constitution. The states are parties to the Constitution. The federal government is subjected to the checks and balances. The state governments are the entities to check that, and one of the ways they do that is to choose who the chief executive of the federation is. So what I'd like to do is propose, and I think everybody in here would agree with me, we want to do a popular vote to elect the Speaker of the House of the State House here. Why not? Well, you first try, well, no, you're not going to do it. Why not? Well, you don't know anything about the Speaker. You don't know about the job. Exactly. The founders weren't stumped on this thing. The founders were crystal clear. When you read the minutes from the Constitutional Convention, they picked this up 4 or 5 different times about the popular vote to elect the chief executive, and they rejected it. And they said, they finally settled after 4 months of debate in Philadelphia, and they said, well, let's have the states do it. And they're going to do it by naming electors. And they're going to be the most smartest guys in the state. They're going to be so smart they can form a college, nicknamed Electoral College. But the only thing the Electoral College is the states electing the President of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. Crawford. Will you be available after the hearing for questions? Thank you. I apologize to cut you off. I need to, we had more people than I anticipated to testify today. Thank you. I'm going to call our final speakers here, Stephen Liddell and Christopher Pearson. And for the others, I'm just going to read into the record. We have Peter Lund in opposition of the bill, Bruce Barland in opposition, Tom Stillings, Tony Daunt, and Sherry Ritchie from PIME, MFE, and Stand Up Michigan. I sincerely apologize we didn't have time for your testimony today. If you'd like to remain afterwards and speak with myself or any of the other committee members, we will be here. And also I would encourage you to please submit your written statement to the committee so that we can have that available. Thank you, and welcome Mr. Liddell and Mr. Pearson. I believe you're from the same group, correct? Okay.
Yes. Good morning, Madam Chair and members. Steve Liedel from Dykema, representing National Popular Vote. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I've submitted written testimony. In the interest of time, I won't provide
Yes, you have
any
about
further.
2 minutes.
Happy to answer any questions either now or my contact information is on the testimony. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Pearson, you probably have about 3.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chairs, members of the committee. Christopher Pearson. Until January, I was a state senator in Vermont. Before that, I served in the House, and I'm proud to be here. I appreciate your time. I work with National Popular Vote and get the honor of testifying around the country. I'll do my best to just answer some of the questions that have come up previously and may or may not have been fully answered. The biggest one maybe is this question around the official count. There is no official National Popular Vote total. It doesn't live in one place. And then we heard more details there. It lives in 51 places, right? Each state and the District of Columbia produces an election result. There's not going to be any judging of the outcome by any member of a compacting state or anybody else, because the compact language itself in the bill in front of you is very clear. It reads, "The chief election official of each member state shall treat as conclusive an official statement containing the number of popular votes in a state for each presidential slate." There's no judgment in there, whether you have a state that uses ranked choice voting like Maine or most states which do not. There is a definitive answer because your elections official will look at Maine's total. They won't be judging which count to use in Maine. They will use Maine's total. We've also heard that somehow California doubled Donald Trump's results. That would have given Donald Trump 55 presidential electors from California, so there's clearly a misunderstanding there. We heard that New York can't count, and that could create a crisis nationally. New York, it's true, has been slow to produce its final tallies, but that is under a system where they know full well the outcome is clear. If there were a question in New York in local elections, or were it to have bearing on the national election, very clearly New York could add staff, create overtime allowances, and come up with a final count. We've seen that in other states. Ranked choice voting is completely compatible with National Popular Vote. The very first coalition partner joining National Popular Vote was Fair Vote, the leading organization behind ranked choice voting efforts around the country. They endorsed and helped draft the language. There was a peculiar assertion that under National Popular Vote, you would only be allowed to count votes from states in the way that National Popular Vote wants them to be. So Arizona wouldn't be included in some way. In fact, the wording, I think the confusion comes that the National Popular Vote Compact in front of you does say that a compacting state, an enactment state, must run a statewide election for president. But it does not exclude states that maybe use the district system like Nebraska or Maine or other states that use a different system. But it does only have a bearing on the states that have passed the law. Other questions that came up during the hearing, what would stop California? Representative Smith asked, what would stop California from allowing 6-year-olds to vote? The 26th Amendment of the Constitution would have some bearing there. You'll recall the slogan, old enough to fight, old enough to vote, when the country decided you had to enfranchise people 18 and over. So that's a clear prohibition. We also heard why would we believe that a national popular vote would broaden the election, today focused very intensely on 12 battleground states, on no more than 30% of the country that's in a competitive state, to the assertion that campaigns would be motivated to go everywhere. We do see voter turnout increase in battleground states 10 to 12% higher on average, because voters know their vote counts, because campaigns are courting their votes. When every vote is equal and every vote matters in every election, we would assume that campaigns and grassroots activists and more would focus everywhere. And so you would anticipate moving from 30% of the electorate having a very meaningful vote to 100%. On and on and on. You've gotten a good flavor today of what opponents have to come up with, because they simply do not share the value that we do, that National Popular Vote delivers, which is that every vote should be equal, and when you get the most votes, you win the election. So I'm glad to take questions. I appreciate the careful testimony here today and your consideration over the many years, and I do hope this is the year that we can bring Michigan on board with the compact. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Pearson. So unfortunately, we don't really have time for questions on the record here, but if anyone has questions for you, I trust you'll be around for a few minutes. Thank you, everyone. We have to exit promptly from this room so that someone else can take it over. I apologize to those who couldn't speak today, but we had a great discussion. So thank you all for attending, and thank you for your testimony. There being no further business before the committee will stand adjourned.